Welcome to the Thirsty Checkdown. I'm your host, Greg Kellogg, with the host with the most, Mr. Tipp Major. How you doing, Tipp?
What's up, Greg? Man, you're settled in. You're in Canton right now. Tell me what's outside your window. What can you see?
Whoa, I can see a building. The Huntington building is what I can see outside the thing. But I mean, driving down, it's Midwest. We drove, through fields basically. Highway went fields on either side. It's basically, and Cleveland got hit by a tornado a couple days ago. It's bad. I mean, trees down, lightning storms were spawned, and a lot of the stoplights they still don't have power. So fortunately, we're an hour away from Cleveland, so we're okay down here. But we got a special guest tonight, and later in the show, I really do want to talk a little bit about how our regular season show, because we've got a new segment that I got to talk to Iggy about and I really want to talk to Will and Ronnie, because Ronnie does AI stuff. Hey, do you know the song Centerfield by John Fogerty?
I can't say that I do, no.
Put me in, coach. I'm ready.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, we can't copy that song, but we can have AI create it and maybe avoid a copyright hit. And I think Put Me in, Coach is our segment for the sleepers.
Greg, I think you need to be in the karaoke night. You sounded good, dude. Yeah.
I suck. I can't sing at all. Anyway, our guest tonight literally wrote the book on fantasy sports, not just football. Yeah, the book behind you, The History of Fantasy Sports by Larry Schechter. And you can buy that book at Amazon.com. Can we get Larry on with us, Iggy? Can you bring him on?
There he is.
Mr. Fantasy Sports himself, Larry Schechter. Larry, I got to say, never in my wildest imagination, I've been in magazines. I've written articles specifically for magazines. I've been on web pages. I've done podcasts. Never did I think I would be in a book. And you included me. I am so humbled. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks for doing what you did. I included a whole lot of people. Most of the people that are included, others have never heard of. And there's a lot of people that I couldn't include. One of the things I wrote at the very beginning of the book is it's like choosing an all-star team. There's just not room for everybody that deserves to be in there. And the story, Paul Charchian was the president of the FSTA from 2009 to 2020. The guy's a president of the FSTA for like 12 years, been in the industry his whole life. He read the book and he said, I didn't know a lot of this. He said, he was enlightened by all the stories. It's like there are people that even someone like Paul Charchian has never even heard of that played a role in this. And then there are other people who've been in the industry that, they know some of what happened, but they say, when they read the book, they learned a lot about people that they've dealt with, people they've known in the industry for years, but they learned a whole bunch of stuff about these people that they had never heard of before.
Well, I've got two questions for you. First and foremost, what prompted you to undertake this? And then second, how much research did you have to do before you put pen to paper?
Well, what prompted me is I've just known for a long time that somebody needed to write a book like this. I look around the world sometimes and I'm like, I see skyscrapers and planes flying in the air, and you turn on a TV and you see some event from Paris. And I'm like, how did this all happen? If it was up to me, we'd still be living in caves, rubbing two sticks together to make fire. And in the same vein, I look at the fantasy industry, starting years ago, I looked at the fantasy industry and go we got it's worldwide, millions and millions of people are playing, not just fantasy football or baseball, but you got fantasy Iditarod, fantasy wakeboarding, you got, Sirius XM radio, dedicated channel, you got podcasts, you got, news service, all this stuff in this industry. I'm like, how did this happen? Where did this all come from? And I've been playing since 1990, fantasy sports, and I've been in two of the big baseball experts leagues, Tout Wars and LABR. So I know some of the people that were involved in the creation of the industry, like Greg Ambrosius and Rick Wolf and Ron Chandler and some other people were involved in this. But I still hardly knew anything about how all this occurred. So I kind of felt like somebody needs to write a book, and I decided I would do it. Now, to your second question, is where it gets kind of interesting, because I thought this is something I could probably talk to 30 people, maybe one person a day. I can knock the book out, in 3 months. Oh my God, was I wrong? I was crazy wrong. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It was like article after article after article. I talked to dozens and dozens of people, some of them for like a total of 3 hours or more. It took like 18 months of basically like a full-time job of researching, talking to people, writing. It was basically like a full-time job for 18 months. And I got to a point where I realized, like, oh my God, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I had to keep going because I knew it was needed. And the other thing that was happening is, originally the book was going to be called The History of Fantasy Sports. But early on, I started to learn things about what happened and the people involved, where I realized there's a lot of great, interesting information, fascinating stories. Like one of the first ones I found out, some of the stuff about like Stratomatic and APA, which are, some people consider them precursors of fantasy sports. And I thought, maybe I'll just write like, 2 or 3 paragraphs mentioning Stratomatic and APA. But it was practically ended up like the whole chapter pretty much, because I was finding, fascinating stuff about people who played for years. And there's a guy developed ALS. A guy had been playing in an Apple baseball league for like 35 years or something like that. He developed ALS. And so he thought he's going to have to quit. His wife told him, if you want to keep playing APA, I'll do whatever I have to do so you can keep playing. And she would go to she would like roll the dice for him and he'd whisper what to do. And she helped him play. And after a few years of this, he got to the point where he could only communicate with an eye reader and by her reading his lips. And he came from 2 runs behind in the bottom of an extra inning game to win his first ever APA league championship after 39 years in the league in that condition.
I think you say Stratomatic, and I'm not sure if it's the same Stratomatic, but my kid brother and me used to have a game that was named Stratomatic Football. It had offensive cards, defensive cards, and special team cards, and you'd slide a defensive card in over top of the offensive card, and then there was a little ball with a white and black half, and that line, you'd pull it back on a spring, and it would basically go back and forth and then stop, and wherever it stopped, that would be the result of the play. And we kept stats for each game. We were Tip. Have you ever been that crazy? I mean, we were kids. We were crazy.
I was pretty crazy. I think I played APA baseball when I was a kid and APA football. I was pretty crazy about it. But, there's like so many stories. Like I got a story in there about John Miller, the broadcaster for the Orioles. He was a broadcaster for the Red Sox and then the Orioles. And the Orioles were taking a flight from Baltimore to the West Coast. And Ken Singleton, one of the players, said, "Hey, John, bring your Stratomatic game. We'll play in the plane." So Ken Singleton and John Miller and a couple other Orioles were playing Stratomatic. And Cal Ripken Jr. walks by. He's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I want to play." So Cal, I get this great story about Cal Ripken playing Stratomatic, and he loses. John Miller beats him. So Cal Ripken goes to the back of the plane, talks to his dad, who's one of the coaches for the Orioles. He comes back like 20 minutes later, goes up to John Miller, said, "Okay, I think I know where I screwed up. Let's play another game."
Wow, that is insane. And you guys are talking, you guys both have a little bit more grade than I do, just a little bit. And you guys are actually talking something that I didn't know until I read the book, because the closest thing I would say I got to this was the electronic football, that the board game that we had or that we would play back in the day. I didn't have it, but I had a couple of friends that did. And then once video games came out, then we would play video games as well. But I got a question. You talked about a little bit about the inspiration of how you started this awesome book. But I want to know the craziest, or maybe not necessarily craziest, but one of the most obscure sports that you didn't know about. You just talked about wakeboarding. I didn't know there was a fantasy football wakeboarding league. Like, what other sports are there out there that we probably don't know about that are in fantasy?
Well, I got a whole list of them. I mean, there's if I let me look it up while I'm talking. Let me say one other thing. I'll look this up for you. Let's see. What I was going to say, just to complete another thought that I was talking about before, Greg, is as I found out all these stories about all these people and all these things that they did in the industry, like fascinating things, inspirational things, funny stories, I realized I could have just write this thing as, tell them basically the facts and figures, what happened when, who did what, and I would tell the whole history, but it would also come off like a boring research paper. But as I was finding out these things, I realized, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the stories of these people because there's so much of it's fascinating, it's, and everything. So I got the book has a subtitle because the book is called The History of Fantasy Sports and the Stories of the People Who Made It Happen. Because that's what makes the book really fascinating. And I'm not just saying that, to brag or something. This is what everybody's saying. The reviews are incredible. People are saying it's really easy to read. It's fascinating. I had a guy say, I've read up to page 30. I already ordered 2 copies for my friends. And I knew, as I was going along, it was so much work, but I was getting this information. And I'm like, oh my God, this book is going to be fucking great. And then, 3 days later, something else like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can't believe this, But it was also an incredible pain in the ass because some of the things I would find out, like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then a week later, I find out that wasn't even true. So, it was a lot of it was a pain. But to get to your question, I'm gonna read you from, let's see, where is this? All right, this is page 241 or so of the book. It says, I've compiled the list of fantasy sports people play, which undoubtedly is not all inclusive. We got baseball, football, basketball, hockey, NCAA football, NCAA basketball, soccer, XFL, USFL, MMA, Arena Football League, Canadian Football League, WNBA, golf, NASCAR, Formula One racing, cricket, alpine skiing, Iditarod, ski jumping, ski racing, bull riding, rodeo, biathlon, gas fishing. I'm not even halfway done. Wakeboarding, wrestling, kabaddi, futsal, volleyball, handball, lacrosse, NCAA lacrosse, esports, The Bachelor, bowling, pickleball, Olympics, rugby, horse racing, tennis, boxing, sumo wrestling, badminton, Major League Table Tennis, EuroLeague, KBO, and UFC. And there's even Fantasy Congress, where contestants pick legislatures in the U.S. House or Senate and get points if they sponsor a bill, pass a bill, speak on the floor, and other things like that.
Yeah, that kind of politics I could get behind.
Yeah, and Peter Shanky, the president of RotoWire, he explained if there's anything you can keep track of, you can make a fantasy sport out of it.
Yeah, that's true. Now, besides the top sports, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, and even soccer, what is one sport that you researched and you were like, hey, I want to play that, and you actually played?
Well, I was so busy writing the book, I didn't have time to play. I mean, I actually had to streamline my fantasy baseball preparation just to play fantasy baseball this year, which actually hasn't turned out to be a good thing. My teams are pretty much out of it now. But I mean, if I had unlimited time, there's other ones I would play. But there wasn't really anything that I saw like, oh my God, I wish I could play fantasy Iditarod or something. But one thing that it amazed me how many different games people are playing. And one thing that's amazing too is in India there are 200 million people playing fantasy cricket.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more than the people who play all fantasy sports combined in the U.S. and Canada.
That's cool. But you mentioned the other sports. I worked for Fox Sports for 1 year, from June of 2000 to June of 2001, and because I was there as the football lead. When football ended, they had to keep paying me, so they wanted me to do something else. So they assigned me to fantasy NASCAR. Do you know the stats that you have for NASCAR? The time that every time a car comes into the pit, it's timed.
Yeah.
That's a stat. That's something you can score based on that stat. Laps led. That's a stat. Kept track of. Winner of the race, of course, but starting position and how far you climbed up the ranks. All that stuff is stats. I was amazed. And so when you start talking about cricket is basically the world's baseball.
Yeah.
It was around before baseball. And fantasy football came after fantasy baseball. You mentioned Tout Wars and LABR. And in your book on page 270, I know this because you autographed it for me. You talk about a league that I put together with Joe Bryan of Football Guys.
Yeah.
And you talk about some stories in there I don't remember. Now, I don't doubt that they're true because I'm 68. My mind's not what it used to be. But you talked about going to Vegas to the convention and having the audience hold up signs 1 through 10 when we would make a pick. I don't remember that. I remember going to Vegas and drafting. I just don't remember the signs.
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, I think that one was about Minneapolis with Paul Chartian's convention where he did that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But then I wasn't there. That's why I don't remember it then.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, if you weren't at that one. I was asking people. I interviewed like probably more than 100 people, mostly by Zoom, and I'm asking these people to try to remember something from 20, 30 years ago, which, it's not easy for people to remember. Like somebody would tell me something and then I'd find an article from 30 years ago where they said something different. So I'm going with what they said 30 years ago. And,
I believe it happened. I do believe it happened. We did. One of the things I'm trying to get Bob Lung to do here at the Fantasy Football Expo. I'm actually in Canton, Ohio. We're going to be at the Hall of Fame for the Expo. I want him to take his Kings Classic League, put him on the stage, and do an analysis draft with it, where you tie the audience in to critique a player or pick a player, give a 1 or 2 sentence explanation of why he picked the player. The problem is timing. Where do you get it in? Where does it? Because Expo is jam-packed. Have you been to one of the expos, Larry?
No, I haven't. How many people do they have usually?
Well, this year it's going to be between 750 and 1,000.
Yeah, okay.
And every one of them is either a fantasy football player,
yeah,
they're all players, but there's also content creators and there's also vendors. There's some new games coming out or twists on old games. And I'm telling you, if you came here and put that book up, you'd be selling it. It would be really easy to sell it here.
I'm going to consider that for next year because I've never been to the Hall of Fame either. So I think I'd like to do that. But by the time I get there next year, everybody should have already bought the book anyway. So they can bring their books that they already bought and I'll sign them for them.
All right. So now you talk about different ways of playing fantasy football. And I think it was 2006 in the book, you talked about daily fantasy sports. And that was created for more the people who didn't really have the time to play season long. So in your opinion, is that your favorite way of playing fantasy sports, or have you played fantasy sports like that? Because I can see something like when you're creating a book or writing a book, you don't have time. So tell us a little bit about the DFS or the daily fantasy sports and what that might mean to you.
All right. Well, it's not about me. First of all, the book's not about me or my opinion or anything like that. It's about, the history and the people that were involved. And I cover everything, basically everything from the precursors. I mean, even before Stratomatic and APA, like even precursors before that, and then to the invention of fantasy baseball, the invention of fantasy football, the first commercial games, newspaper games, legal issues that have happened, the FSTA, news services, stat services, fantasy, the magazines, TV, radio, like everything that occurred. And then you get to, more recent times is where daily fantasy comes in. Daily fantasy was one of the more recent inventions where people came up with this idea, and it was actually, it was made possible by some legislation in Congress that made it considered not gambling to do a daily game. So people came up with the idea of doing daily games because it would be easier. Like one of the problems people have in not wanting to play fantasy sports is the time commitment, where baseball's 6 months and football's 17, 18 weeks. So a lot of people don't want to make that time commitment. Daily is, it's quick. You can play for one day, or let's say it's June, the middle of June, you decide you want to play fantasy baseball. Well, season long, you're too late, you missed it, but daily you can start playing anytime you want. So, daily was a great idea that people had and has become huge. It also created a lot of problems though, when DraftKings and FanDuel were advertising everywhere. You couldn't turn on the radio or TV without hearing FanDuel and DraftKings every 2 seconds, which created a lot of problems. It created a very risky legal situation where, the whole industry almost got shut down.
I gotta say, I'm kind of reading the comments in the chat as we're going, and Mike from Surf Football is one of the guys that's going to be here at the expo and has a brand new product that he's marketing. And he had this to say, Larry. I love that book. It explained the origins of the Kings and Queens Classic. So, Larry, your impact on the industry, it's wider than I think.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, thank you. And I'll tell you, everybody's got to read the book. I spent 18 months full-time writing this thing. And I spent another several months pretty much full-time, getting it published. And now I'm spending full-time trying to get it promoted. I didn't do it to make money. I did it as a contribution to the fantasy world. So everybody's got to read this book. I'm telling you, the reviews are unbelievable. If you go on Amazon and look at all the reviews, you'll see what I'm saying. The reviews are incredible. If you like fantasy sports, you're going to love the book. And if you're listening to this right now, you're listening to this right now because you love fantasy sports, or at least fantasy football. So you will love the book, I guarantee it. And about that comment, that reminded me when you mentioned that we had this interview coming up today on Twitter. Somebody on Twitter who hopefully is probably listening to this right now, he said something like, "I love Wink," and he's referring to Bill Winkenbach, who was credited with creating fantasy football like 60 years ago. And so Wink has obviously covered chapter 3 of the book is the origins of fantasy football. Wink is, very prominent. He really did create fantasy football. But what I wanted to say is the guy that said, "I love Wink," I wonder, have you heard of Andy Musolinas? Wink basically created the game with a little bit of help. Andy Musolinas is the guy who spread the word. He's the one who actually spread it to the public. He bought a bar and he decided to offer the game to his patrons at the bar. That's where the King's X League, that's where the Kings and Queens Leagues come in. His bar was called the King's X. So his first league was the Kings League. And then he had some other leagues. And then when they did a ladies only league, because the men didn't want to play with the ladies, so they had a ladies only league, they called that the Queens League. And, I said, I would do like so much research. I would just like do one article after another. So like when I got to like Andy Musolinas, for example, I would like Google every article I could find. And there's also a really good website, newspapers.com, where you can subscribe to it. And you can search articles from years ago. So I would read like one article after another to the point where it's like I'm reading the same information, for the 25th time. But then all of a sudden there'll be like one little tidbit I hadn't seen before. And Andy Musolinas was like amazing, because I read a whole bunch of stuff about Andy Musolinas and what he did with his bar and spreading fantasy football. Then all of a sudden, I don't remember if it was the 10th article or the 20th article or whatever it was, because all of a sudden I get to this article, the guy was a goddamn war hero. All of a sudden I found out he was a war hero. When he was 17 when Pearl Harbor happened, and he enlisted And he enlisted in a division where they were going to go behind enemy lines, and the recruiter said 97% of you are not going to return.
Wow.
And he had a cyanide pill at all times, and if he got caught, he could kill himself.
Wow.
I got JC trying to show off something, but I want to bring Iggy in real quick. On our ride up here, he mentioned somebody that was in that original league that I didn't know about.
Well, did you come across any research suggestion about Ron Wolf was a part of that league with Wink and over in that Oakland crew, and before he became more of a vice president role with the Raiders? Did you see anything? And thanks, Larry, for joining us, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Ron Wolf, who became the GM of the Packers.
Yes, my favorite.
Packers. He's mentioned in the book. He was in Ron Wolf. He was in the original league, and he later became GM of the Packers. There's a guy who, one of the I think it was I forget it was Zappa or Stratomatic guys. He was like the commissioner of a Zappa league. In fact, wait, I can look this up really quick.
Yeah, he's my guy. I'm a Packers fan. 96, I was a kid, running around, putting it in all my friends in Dallas-Fort Worth faces.
Iggy told me that on the ride up, and I said, we got to ask you about it.
Yeah.
So this other guy,
the fantasy thing to the real thing,
Yeah, this other guy is going to mention Jim. His name is Jim Drucker. He was the commissioner of the Continental Basketball Association from 78 to 86, and he was the commissioner of the Arena Football League from 94 to 96. But his most proud accomplishment was when he was the commissioner of the East Meadow Stratomatic League from 72 to 78.
Wow.
Okay, now we got to go to break. But we'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes after break with a lot more from Larry. So before we go to our ad read, I've got a read that I'm supposed to do, but we've got an ad for the drafters, right? So let's bring the drafters up while I go find the.
Here we go.
Okay, and what I wanted to talk about was something that Tip and I did last night, actually. We drafted with Imran of Generations. Generations is a brand new game that's being displayed at this year's Fantasy Football Expo. It is a game that allows you to play with modern players and historic players. My running back crew, it's got a small, you don't have to pick starters. It's kind of like best ball, but it's actually all ball. Everybody that's in your lineup scores, and you have weekly matchups, and their scores are based on a historic game randomly chosen. So I've got O.J. Simpson and Derrick Henry as my running backs. I've got Danny Marino as my quarterback. Now, we did a test of this with the TSA. Just a 18 test. You play every team one time, and then you go into the playoffs. And I got to do this because Tip's the host with the most. He finished 2-5. I finished 5.
You had to throw that in there, huh?
I finished 5-2, but then I lost to JC. My buddy JC won the championship. Come over here, get on the camera. Yeah, JC won the championship. That said, we ran a bigger league, a 12-team league, and I beat JC in the championship. Playoffs. So we're going to talk about that. And Imran is enjoying this show too, Larry. There's just so much innovation at the Fantasy Football Expo.
Yeah.
You can't innovate unless you know the history. And so I want to go back to my personal history a little bit. You wrote about me. And I know that you didn't interview me because I would remember that.
Yeah.
Where did you get the information on me? Because it was dead on. It was spot on. It was really good.
Honestly, I have no recollection of where I did. I did talk to Joe. I interviewed Joe Bryant. I don't remember. He may have said a little bit about you. I may have found a few articles that mentioned you as far as starting FanX and Kellogg's comments. But the honest answer is I do not remember, but I'm sure, when I heard that you were involved with FanX, I Googled you. Yeah, but I don't remember anything more specific than that.
Your research was spot on, because everything you wrote about me was dead right. It was so good. Tip, you've got the book. Read 270. You'll find out.
I've already read it, and I've heard it 1,000 times from you too. So when I went back and read it, you were right, because exactly how you told me the story of FanX and how everything went with Fox Sports and everything, it was right on the money, like you said. It was. Yeah,
I did. I mean, a lot of things, as I said before, were a pain in the butt. Like I had to really research and talk to people and to try to get everything straight, because like I said, there were things that people didn't remember, maybe remembered wrong. And, there were things I had to take great effort to try to make sure I got my facts straight. And one thing, just for like a kind of a stupid little example, when I was writing, there's a chapter about the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. So I have the whole story of how that came to be, and then, how it started and what they do, and, legal issues they've helped with it and everything. But like, I wanted to find out something that seemed pretty simple. Like, okay, the very first Fantasy Sports Trade Association board meeting, who was on the board? And that was like really hard. Some people said there were 10 people on the board. Others like, no, there were 12. And then, trying to find out who was there, who wasn't there. And John Zaleski, one of the people who was there on the first board, when I talked to him about this, I mentioned Christine Shellhart from Sporting News was one of the people on the board. And he's like, oh, no, there weren't any women there. And the thing is, she was there. She was on the first board. She was there. But, 30 years later, 25 years later, whatever it is, his recollection is, oh, there were no women there. But she was there. So I finally pinned it down, how many people were there and who was there. And Zaleski he's got a great story about that first board meeting, where he said the first board meeting, they were at like a big lawyer-like conference table. He's sitting at one end of the table, and this other guy from EA Sports, which I can't remember his name off the top of my head, he was sitting at the other end of the table. And before the meeting started, the two of them looked at each other and started laughing out loud. And other people were like, what's so funny? And simultaneously, Zaleski and this other guy, they say, we're at a fucking board meeting for fucking fantasy sports. Like, who would have ever thought there'd be a board meeting for fantasy sports?
That had to be astounding to anybody in that day and age, though.
Yeah.
Today, Tip, would it surprise you that this is a multi-million-dollar industry?
Yeah. I mean, people that were involved in the beginning, some of them told me, they aren't surprised what happened, because they knew fantasy sports was so great and people loved it, and they aren't surprised with what's happened with the growth. And then other people like, no, I never would have imagined it would have been like this. And, the people that got into something like that thinking it'd be like a part-time thing they would do to make a little extra money, it turned into like a full-time career. One of the things that is in common with most of the people that I interviewed, most of the people in the book, the thing that they have in common in creating this industry is they saw something that was needed and created it. Like, somebody would be playing fantasy football years ago, and they'd say like, well, there's no information about this. Like, I'll start writing some information, or I'll start a magazine, because there's no magazines. Greg was one of those people that got in early. And then other people were like, there should be like a news service where you can like look up a player and find out, is he playing? Is he hurt? So everybody in the book is like, they saw something that was needed and it didn't exist, or maybe it existed, but they thought they could do it better. And so I've got stories of like dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs and what they did. And, out of this, you got magazines, you got RotoWire, Roto World, you got Daily Fantasy Sports, everything that exists. And something that was really cool for me personally is the book's not about me, but something that was really cool for me is when I was done with the book, my editor suggested I write an epilogue, kind of wrapping it all up. So I thought, okay, that's just there's a brief epilogue. And when I was thinking about what to write in the epilogue, it occurred to me, I just did what all these entrepreneurs did. I saw that there's no history of the industry. We need to have a history of the industry, and I did it. So it's like, well, that's cool. I just did what all these other entrepreneurs did. Saw something that was needed. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear about something. And, we talked about a lot of great men in this industry, but there are a lot of great women in this industry as well.
Oh, yeah.
However, I do want to talk about the women that are against fantasy football or fantasy sports in general. So talk to me about that, because that was that little paragraph or two was pretty funny. I was laughing out loud.
Larry, he's been wanting to talk about this all night.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, there's like, hundreds of things in here, interesting little things I found out about included in the book. And one of them, which I'd never heard about it, most people never heard about. And it was 2008, a woman named Allison Lodish started a group called Women Against Fantasy Sports. She had a website and a Facebook page, and it was a forum where wives and girlfriends could support each other and post their tales of frustration. And she said at the time, we can't beat fantasy sports, but we can torment it. And she sold things. She sold things on the website, and the most popular thing she sold was women's panties that said "closed for the fantasy season."
I gotta tell you, I love it, man. That is insane. And,
there's a company, RotoWear, that I mentioned in the book that now sells T-shirts and stuff. And I thought, when this guy, I haven't talked to the RotoWear guy myself. He's in the book. I didn't interview him. And then when he reads this book, he's got to get this idea, like, I need to come out with these panties. Like he's got T-shirts. Somebody needs to make these panties. If RotoWear doesn't do it, somebody's got to redo these panties, because Allison Lodish hasn't done this for years. And there's one thing. I'll add a story from Allison Lodish that I did not put it in the book. Could have put it in the book. I didn't. But she said that Matthew Berry, when the year that Tom Brady got hurt, like in the first game of the year, Matthew Berry wrote a column that said something like the two unluckiest people in the world are Tom Brady owners and Allison Lodish's husband. And she was very she felt very good. She wasn't insulted. She felt very good that Matthew mentioned her.
Right.
Matt, people may not know this. Matthew was a screenwriter before he became a big fantasy guy. He is one of the most humorous writers I've ever known. He is quick and he knows fantasy, but he is just so funny. Go ahead, Tip. Sorry to step on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He's hysterical. I mean, he was in Tout Wars with me for several years before he stopped playing fantasy baseball, and we all miss him. He's a riot, And he of course he's mentioned a lot in the book. There's quite a bit in the book about him. And one thing people don't know though is he was in like one of the original rotisserie leagues. Like, wow. Dan Okrent and his friends started, Dan Okrent's the guy who's credited with inventing rotisserie baseball. Now, there's a whole lot more to the story than that. He didn't magically come up with, there's a fable that he basically magically came up with the idea for rotisserie baseball on a plane ride from Connecticut to Texas. That's not true at all. I got all the details. Okrent's, one of the people I interviewed. I got all the details on what really happened. But anyway, he's the guy who gets the most credit for inventing rotisserie baseball. And that was in 1980. And then in 1984, Bantam Books published a book that Okrent and some of his league mates wrote, and that's one of the things that really started to spread rotisserie baseball. When that book came out in 1984, they sold something like 50,000 copies, and everybody started a league. And Matthew Berry, at age, I think it was age 13 or 14, Matthew Berry was one of the people that bought that book and got into a league. That's how he got his start in fantasy.
Wow. I mean, we're talking about history, everyone, in the history of fantasy sports. And when I read the book, I went across several different columns and things that just spoke out to me. And this one spoke out to me too. What the hell is fantasy sports insurance? Like that, when I read that, I was like, what? So explain that to the audience, Larry, because that was insane. I've never heard of anything like that. Yeah.
Well, there's a chapter. I have a chapter called Innovative Entrepreneurs. And that's people who created like unusual things. And fantasy sports insurance is one of them, where this guy got an idea, like, you spend a lot of time drafting your team, and a lot of leagues you have entry fees. So that fantasy sports insurance was you'd pay a fee. It's like kind of like regular insurance. And if you I don't know, like if you joined the league for $300 and your star running back gets hurt and misses a certain amount of games, your insurance policy pays off. So, you pay like $20 for insurance policy, and if the guy gets hurt for a certain amount of games, they give you $100 of your entry fee back, or something, something along those lines. And one of the guys that first did it, Priest Holmes, was like the #1 overall pick at the time. So everybody who signed up with his company, like lots of people insured Priest Holmes, and Priest Holmes got hurt. So this guy lost a lot of money.
Wow. All right.
Is it still a viable effort now? Are there still people doing that, or did it go away because of the losses?
I should know the answer to that question, and I don't know. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Oh, well, good. You've made me look things up, so now I've made you look something up.
You see, I wish I had a perfect memory and I could remember every detail in the book, but I don't remember every detail. But I'm gonna have to look it up. I'll keep talking. I'll look it up while we're talking.
Okay. Well, my next question was, because you mentioned a friend of mine, and that's Paul Charchian. And Charch ran a site called Fanball, which was basically a magazine site with a website attached. He went from there to a thing called LeagueSafe. Now, LeagueSafe basically guarantees payouts. Any industry is going to have good and bad people get in, and it seemed that there were people that were taking all the league dues in, but not paying out the winners. So Paul came up with this idea. You send us your league dues, and we'll make the payments for you. LeagueSafe. Did you write about that in the book? Because I haven't gotten to that section.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, LeagueSafe. In this chapter about innovative entrepreneurs, LeagueSafe is included in there. And Charchian's also included for the guillotine leagues that he started for football. You got Jason Plemmel, who started Mock Draft Central, and you got a few other topics in there. To answer your other question, I looked it up. Yeah, fantasy sports insurance. There are companies still offering it as of now. I should have known that. And there's companies that do fantasy dispute resolution. Like if you got people are arguing if a trade is fair or not. So there's a dispute resolution service that people have offered. And RotoWare, I mentioned RotoWare earlier. They're in there. Trophy Smack. Have you heard of Trophy Smack?
I actually have a ring in my suitcase about Trophy Smack.
Okay.
They sent me the wrong ring, and then when I notified them, they immediately sent me the right ring, and they told me to keep the other one. So right next to your book at the expo starting on Saturday, we're going to display a Trophy Smack ring
Yeah.
for the 2020 championship team named Better Than a Thielen.
Yeah. So Trophy Smack is, if people haven't heard of it, it's a big company. I mean, they've got great, what's the word I'm looking for? Rings and championship belts and stuff like that.
Okay, Tip, I need you to reach behind you, grab the book, and put it up close so we can show it. Other way.
There we go.
There you go. Put it up close so we can see it. The history of fantasy sports. Now, Larry, I know it's found more than just on Amazon. Where else can people find this book?
Most online websites, most booksellers' online websites have got it available paperback or ebook. Not everyone, but most of them. Amazon definitely has it. It's starting to get in some stores here and there, but it's not in too many stores yet.
Do you get paid more for one version than the other?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, well, tell us which one you get paid more for, because that's the one we want to promote. You did the work.
Well,
you deserve the money.
Well, paperback and Amazon would be the best.
Buy
Also,
it from Amazon, people.
Amazon will get it to you in 24 hours, and that's also Amazon's got the best price also right now too. Amazon, the list price is $24.99, but Amazon's got it for $22, and they got the Kindle for $1 off also. So they're offering the best price as well.
Well, we want to thank you. Tip, do you have any more questions?
No, he actually, my fifth question was going to be about the dispute resolution, and he talked about it.
Okay, so we're going to let you go a little early because we're getting ready for the actual fantasy football season. And our show is going to undergo a change, going from being an interview show to a prepare your teams to win this week show. So we want to talk about that a little bit later. But Larry, thank you so much for coming on. And if there's ever anything we can do, you just let us know. We'll get it out there for you. And in fact, if you want to give me a 30-second reading blurb for your book, I will read it on one show a month for the next 3 months.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Larry.
All right.
So, Tip, we've got a new show coming up starting. Guys, you can take Larry away so he can go home. Thanks, Larry.
Okay, thanks. I'll see you.
Thank you, Larry. We appreciate you, man.
Okay, so guys, first of all, audience, thank you for tuning in. And Larry is great. Get the book. I'm telling you, it's a great book.
It's funny. It's a lot of history, but it is very, very funny, very entertaining,
very readable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like I said, start on page 270. You can go back to the beginning later. Start on page 270. You'll hear about me. Anyway, and we all like to hear about ourselves. I actually, the section right after me is about Joe Bryant, and I got a hug from Joe today. When I got in, I saw him in the Fantasy Football Expo. Folks, you got to get to the expo. You just got to get to the expo. We're going to be rubbing shoulders with all the vendors there. We've already had Mike from Surf Football and Imran from Generations in there, and Imran has graciously invited myself and I believe Tip to join him on the stage. He is a stage breakout sponsor. Generations is, so we will be talking about his new product, the Generations product. But y'all can get a head start. You can go to your local Play Store. It's on the Apple Store. Look up Generations Fantasy Football, and you can actually get into leagues today. It is pretty amazing. It is, and we're going to be talking about it at the expo. And we got Disco made it. It's great to see Disco in the channel. That's another product that is going to be on display here at the expo. It's Best Ball, and they have and my boys JC and Tip are doing Best Ball drafts. Well, JC is. Come here, JC. Come here. Pete and JC are doing them, And basically, they do them 5 nights a week. Okay, 5 nights a week. And they usually do the $2 one.
15 on Friday.
And they do 15 on Friday. The $15 one, do you have the overview, Iggy, for the $15 one?
The drafters, I can pull it up.
Yeah, so Tip and JC are going to try to get the overview. The $15 one, you can win $500,000. And we actually know the gentleman who finished in 7th place, he won $35,000 for a $15 entry fee. Now, not everybody wins, but there's like 10,000 people that win. Okay. And if you're good, you're good. Okay. Here's the drafters thing. You can hear me, but you can see it. Is it audio video? That's what I wanted. It's 2.5 million in total prizes, guys. And you can draft with JC and Pete weekly. Now the other one, the $2 one, only has 25,000 for the first prize, but they're giving away 100,000, right?
Yes. 500,000 in the $15 one.
No, the $2 one, 200,000.
200,000 total prizes, yeah, in the $2 one. So the $15 one is a $500,000 first prize. They're giving away 2.5 million in total prizes, and like I said, 7th place took home 35,000. So you don't win. You don't have to win the top to win big.
So what do we do, Greg? We just download the app Drafters?
Download the app, make a deposit. And I got to tell you, thanks for reminding me, Tip. When you initially deposit money, if you put in the code TSA BETS, TSABETS, and I'll try to get them to put it in the chat, TSA Bets will double your initial deposit up to $100. So you put in
get that double.
You put in 100, you got a 200 to bet with. Okay.
All right.
And you can have multiple entries in that $15 one, up to 150, is it? You can have up to 150 entries if you want to do it. Me, I'm just going to do it and see what I can get out of it. I'm not keeping any of the money. This is just so everybody knows. If I win 500,000, because I've entered 2 or 3 of the $15 ones, if I win 500,000, fantasycares.org is getting 500,000. I'm not taking a dime. If I win $16, fantasycares.org is getting $16. I'm not taking a dime. Now, I did not put in $100. I was stupid. I put in 25. I had 50 to gamble with, and my friend Disco, Big Draft Energy, he's got his nightly show too. You can follow him. He's actually paid for me to draft once or twice. He gives free tickets every show. He goes out and he makes extra money so he can give you guys free entries. But the way to do it is to sign up with the code. I gave you the code, TSA Bets. Get in there and do it. Now, for our show, Tip, we're going to start with news, okay? Iggy is doing a great job putting together some intro segment videos for us. Now, I'm trying to get Iggy to put in a new one for our 3rd segment, which is a new segment. Our first segment is news. That was our segment intro for the news and notes. That's going to be our first segment. It'll take the first 14 minutes of the show. Okay. Our second segment, Iggy, do you have the intro for it? That's our second segment. That's Studs to Sit. And basically last year I went back and I looked at how we did. I think it was 68% right.
Wow.
Now, studs we're telling you take a top 12 player and sit him. And if he doesn't finish in the top 12, well, no, we did a little different. We said he had to finish as a non-starter. So for a non-starter, he had to finish outside the top 24 running backs and wide receivers. Tight end and quarterback was top 12. But we basically we were about 68%, but we were 79% during the playoff weeks. And that was week 15, 16, and 17. We were 79% of studs you should sit. Well, I thought that's pretty good. And we tracked it every week. We're going to track it again, but we're doing it a little different this year. Our guests are typically pros. Our guests are typically content creators. And so we're going to have Tipp and I are going to make a projection. And if one of us can't make it, either JC or Iggy will fill in as the TSA guy. Okay, we're also going to have a pro and a Joe. We're going to track TSA. So theirs is getting combined. We're going to track all the pros and all the Joes, Tips, and mine. We're separate, even though we could go together. We're going to do it separate so you can tell how we're doing. And we're doing that so you know whether or not to listen to us. We want you to know whether or not to listen to us. Well, our third segment in this show is a new one. Here we're telling you, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. We're taking sleepers and saying they should be started. So if we're going to tell you to start a running back or wide receiver, they got to be outside the top 24, and they got to finish inside the top 24. Now, on this one, I'm going to give you an extra point if you go 12-1. If you take somebody, you're going to get an extra point for that. You get 0 points if you fail. You get 1 point if they're a starter, and they should have been. And you get 2 points if they're a stud starter for running back and wide receiver. So you can get extra points that way. But we're also going to track yes and no. Yes, they were startable. No, they weren't startable. So that we can have an easier number at the end of the year. And then our final segment is one we did last year that we just have fun with. And we call that This Day in History. And I've gone out for every week and picked out something from history. And then I turn it into something that we can turn around and tie into fantasy football. And if I can bring it up, Tipp, talk for a minute while I go look for it.
Yeah, I mean, guys, look, this is a perfect way for not only you guys to interact with us, but to hold each other accountable. And that's what we're about. We're about here at the TSA, the Sports Affiliation. We're about holding each other accountable, but having fun doing it. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, you were wrong. You got me. You lost me that week. But just have fun with it. But we are here. We do a lot of research, Greg and myself, and Iggy and JC. We do a lot of research behind the scenes to make sure that we get 65%, 78, 79% of the things correct.
Okay, so now I'm going to pull up the October 3rd, This Day in History. October 3rd, 1952, called Operation Hurricane, the Brits' nuclear test was conducted near the Montebello Islands in Western Australia. Didn't know that, did you? Okay.
No.
Who will be now, the Brits were the third nation to do a nuclear test. America, Russia, the Brits. All right.
Oh.
Who will be the third highest scoring fantasy player this week?
Oh, wow.
That's how I tied it in. Third. So we're going to do that all year. We're going to have fun with history, and then we're going to tie it into fantasy. And this, I have to give credit for this segment to Andrew Cooper, Coop A Fiasco on Twitter. Coop looked at my very first show and critiqued it for me. Now, if you can't take critique, you shouldn't be a content creator. You can always get better, but you got to hear what you're doing wrong. So one of our things was in our introduction, we have to tell you what we're going to talk about. So we do that at the beginning of the introduction now. And one of the other things we do was Coop said, you got to have one fun segment. So This Day in History is my fun segment. I like to do that.
And it is fun, and Greg knows a lot of history, and he researches a lot of different history. And I
don't know it. I look it up on Google.
Well, you research it. You figure, yeah, you know it. It is, but it's fun. And I love the way, because when we did this last year on Spaces, I love the way how you would tie it in with football and fantasy. So it was fun. But before we go, guys, look, one more time. Here's the book.
History of Fantasy Sports. Go buy it from Amazon.
Go check it out.
I want to say thanks to James Seal, because James is
always
in our team. He's
Yeah, he
always
is.
in our chat, and he's always talking to us, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
James
he's going to
is.
be here. We're going to meet him.
Oh, I get
We're
to
gonna
meet
meet him, yeah.
James. Oh,
Yeah.
snap! All right.
Yeah. So we had a lot of things in here, and I also want to say thank you to Big Draft Energy in the chat.
Yes.
That's Disco. If you look up Big Draft Energy for a Twitter handle, he's the one that turned us on to drafters, and he kind of brought JC and Pete into the drafters family. So we always support him as well. His problem is that he does his show at 7:00, which is when we do our show. So I've been on his show. I just can't do it on Thursday nights. And he knows that, and he's good about that. So give Big Draft Energy a follow on Twitter. Come and follow again. Please go to YouTube, like and subscribe to the Sports Affiliation. Now, we're working on our website. We're going to professionalize it up, but you're going to be able to get written content and video content, and a lot of it on our website. But also, we're making a big push in TikTok. So if you have little short TikTok videos that you want to get some play on, then you need to get it to the Sports Affiliation so they can publish it for you, because they have a fan base already, and it's growing. We want to thank everybody. Tip, thanks. I'll see you tomorrow, 1:30. You're supposed to get in, right?
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of delays and people getting their flight delayed. Look, fingers crossed. We're not going to get any delays. I'll be there at 1:30, ready to party.
You do know that Houston has a direct flight to Cleveland, but you have to use a United. He went Southwest. Yeah.
Me too.
So, yeah, Iggy went Southwest too, and he got stuck. But he wasn't stuck that long, a couple hours, right?
Not even an hour.
Yeah.
You get here, Tip. We'll have fun once you do.
Hey,
So-
if I get stuck and they say that what is it, like a 6-hour drive to Cleveland from Chicago, I'll drive it.
Iggy, come here. I got to get Iggy on screen real quick.
I had time for one best ball draft.
Okay, I want you to look at his hair. All right, you see the dreads. Now Iggy is sharp. He knows fantasy sports, and he's a good guy. And I'm trying to get him to hook up with a guy named Jay. Jay Matthew. We're going to talk to you, Jay. We're going to get to you. So it's going to be this week. We will get to you. We're going to call you maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but we're going to talk to you. We're going to try to bring Jay onto the team. If you guys want to get on our podcast, there's an email called tc_booking@yahoo.com. Tip has the password. I have the password. You send us a note, and if we have an opening, first come, first serve. If you're a content creator, we have limited openings. If you are a Joe, if you're a player and you just love to play and you want to get on and remember, you're going to have to pick a stud to sit and a sleeper to start, but you only do it one time and you only have to pick one of each. Send us an email at tc_booking@yahoo.com, and we will schedule you. We will.
Take us out.
Take us out. Thank you, Iggy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tip.
Peace.
I'll see you tomorrow.